It's my pleasure this morning to introduce the speaker, Camden Ross, and just met him this morning, and he is the now I knew I had this all straight here, right? His wife's parents are Jim and Cheryl Foland. So his wife is the daughter of Jim and Sarah Foland, making him their son-in-law. Okay, I got that right. And Camden lives in Nampa and works at the press. And he is presenting our sermon this morning, God's Treasure. You're welcome. Here.
Thank you for inviting me here. It's an honor to be able to speak at a different church. I normally go to the Experience just down the street from here, but it's been a while since I've been here, and it's great to be back. Let's begin with prayer. Father, speak through me this morning. Let the words that come out of my mouth not be my words. Let them be your words. And let it not be me up here speaking. Let it be you preaching through me. I love you, Father. Amen. Several years ago, I think it was when I was a junior in high school, back when email was still kind of a new thing, I had signed up for an email newsletter. Those are a little bit more common now than they were back then. And among the things that I got sent in this email newsletter, most of the things were jokes or just kind of humorous stories. But there was one story that wasn't as humorous, but it really kind of stuck with me. And it stuck with me long past the newsletter fading away. And I want to share that story with you this morning. Since the person who did the newsletter was not good at citing his sources for it when I was preparing this message, I didn't actually have a good reference as to where the story came from. So I adapted a lot of the parts. I added details. I took a couple other things out. And so I kind of made it my own. And upon sharing with another friend of mine, they said, that looks a lot similar to a story that you can find in one of Max Lucado's books. And I quickly looked up the reference that they were talking about. And in fact, I am going to speak an adapted version of one of Max Lucado's stories. So if you happen to recognize elements of this story, I want to be able to give credit where credit is due, that it's loosely based off of Max Lucado. Once there was a king, and this king lived in a vast kingdom, and this king had many children. 4 of his children happened to be especially close in age, and they often hung out and played together. And as we'll be able to see here shortly, each of them they were similar in age, but that was about all that they were similar in. Like, they were rambunctious kids, but each of them had their own personality. The king's one rule, and it was a rule of protection for his kids, was that they just don't play near the river. There was a river that ran. It was a very fast-moving river, especially the part that went behind the castle. And the king's one rule for his children was that don't play, and especially don't go in the river, but better just to stay away from it. However, these 4 children decided one day, after getting a little bored, that they were going to go out and play near the river. They weren't going to go in the river. They were just going to go near the river. Some of you might follow where this story is going to go. So they hurry down, and they go down, and they kind of survey the river. It's like, wow, that's fast-moving water. The oldest, we'll call him Rebellious, was the one who had the idea of going down to the river. And he thought, it'd be really fun to just pick up sticks and stuff and just toss it into the river. So they kind of scavenged around. There were some trees around there, and they found some sticks. They just started tossing them in the river, and they just watched them float away. The second oldest, or the next younger child, her name, we'll call her Curious, because as the sticks were floating down the river, she would creep up a little bit closer and just kind of watch to see, and they'd go around a little lazy curve. And she was a little curious as to where they were going. She's like, wonder where they go. I wonder what's past that curve. The third child, we'll call him Practical. It's like, oh, we can easily figure that out. Just let's lean out a little bit further, and we'll be able to see where it goes. But we don't want to slip in, so let's make a chain and just kind of lean out. And so they all kind of, the fourth child was Follower, and she had a little bit of hesitation about this plan, but she was a follower, so she wasn't going to say anything. She wasn't going to rock the boat. And so the four of them kind of made this chain. Rebellious was the oldest of the four of them, and so therefore thereby the strongest. And so he kind of propped himself up against a tree, and they just stretched out over the water, and Curious is over there looking. Still curving. Can't see past it. However, as they were peering over, a fly landed on Rebellious's nose. Thinking he had sure footing, he let go of the branch, and the next thing they know, they were being swept down the river. Down the river they went, and they went over rocks. They went through, there's a couple little waterfalls that they kind of got sloshed around. It's possible that they might even have gotten knocked unconscious. But as the sun was going down, the river kind of came around into a smoother, softer part as they had been washed down all day, and they were able to struggle to shore, far, far away from their home, from the king's castle. Practical, kind of beating himself up a little bit, said, we need to make a fire. We need to stay warm. We need to get dry. So they made a fire, and they huddled around the fire, and they talked about what life was like back at living at home in the king's castle. Night after night, they would gather around the fire. During the day, they would go out and kind of scavenge around for food, and each night they would come back together around a fire and remembering what life was like back in the king's castle. After several months had gone by, the one night came, and only 3 showed up that night. Rebellious wasn't there. Where's Rebellious? So they left the fire, they started searching around, and they ended up finding him. He was down in a little bit of a valley, a little bit away from the river, and he had made a house. And it looked like he was throwing a little bit of a party. He had made some friends with some of the natives, and he was throwing a party. So they knock at the door. They're like, hey, Rebellious, we were looking for you at the fire. Why aren't you here? Oh, glad you're here. Come on in. Welcome. I just finished building this house. As you can tell, it took me several months to put it together, but it's finally ready. So we can, I know it was nice back at the king's castle, but we're here now. So we better make the best of it. The 3 of them thought it over and decided, what you say is true. We are down here now, but we're not ready to give up hope yet. So they went back to the fire and told stories and remembered what life was like back in the king's castle. Several more months went by, and one evening, only 2 showed up. Where's Curious? What happened to Curious? So Follower and Practical went out looking for her, and they found her on a hill overlooking Rebellious's house. And Like, what are you doing here? We were waiting for you. We were looking for you at the fireplace. He's like, oh, I was scavenging around and I happened to be over here and I look down over Rebellious' house and I can't believe what he's doing. Like, Father would be ashamed of the way that he's conducting himself. He's turned into a savage. I need to stay here. I need to watch. I need to pay attention. I need to keep a written record of what Rebellious is doing so that when Father ends up coming back, because he'll end up coming back, I'm sure. He'll end up finding us. I want to have an accurate record of everything that Rebellious has done. Are you sure that's a wise idea, Curious? Of course it is. Father needs to know. If you say so, but you shouldn't base your life off of his. But we won't tell you what to do. So they went back to the fire. Several more months went by, and then one evening, a follower showed up and she was alone. Where in the world is Practical? So she found Curious, and she's like, have you seen Practical? No, I haven't seen him. Goes down, knocks on the door. Rebellious, have you seen Practical? No, I haven't seen him. And so she looks around a bunch more, but she can't find him. And so she goes back to the fire. She has been thinking a lot. She's one of the more introverted, introspective people. And she's thinking, it's like, why are we here? Why didn't I speak up when I knew I should have? Why am I too timid, too shy to be able to speak my mind? And that night, as she lay alone by the fire, she decided that she would be a little bit more intentional of a follower instead of just following what the crowd was doing. The next morning, she got up, she looked around a little bit more, and she happened to decide, well, let me go back over and look by the river. And so she went back over to the river that they washed up on, probably like 9, 10, almost a year previous to this. And she ended up seeing Practical out in the middle of the water, fighting the current as he was trying to move rocks around. So she waded out to see what he was doing. Practical, what are you doing? I'm the one who got us into this mess. I need to get us out of it. It was my idea to lean out over the river, and so it's up to me to make a path up the river. Well, haven't you thought about going up beside the river? I kind of tried that at first, but the brush is too thick, and I know that there was several places as we were getting washed down that the river forked and just did some weird things, and there were some waterfalls, and it's just we have to go up the river because I don't think that we're going to be able to make it up on land. But the current is too strong, but I have to try. So with that, follower left him struggling with the river, struggling putting 2 stones in place and then watching one of them roll away, getting a little bit of a barrier, and then the water would just wash over it. And more time passed. We're going to break from the story for a moment, and I want to share with you an insight that I had recently in the scripture reading for today. Looking in Matthew 13, you can turn there with me. The passage that we looked at comes at the very end of a tale, like of a string of Jesus' parables. All through Matthew 13, it's parable, then parable, and then parable. And all of these parables have to do with the kingdom of heaven. And in my morning devotional, in my morning study time, I kind of knew that this passage was coming up. And it was always one of those interesting things because every time that I had read this passage before, these 3 parables, they had all been separate. But before that morning, I had never really read them together. So starting in verse 44, we look at the first one. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and hid, and for joy over it, he goes and sells all he had and buys that field. And let's put the next one with it, because the next one is very similar. And verse 45 says, "Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it." These two parables are interesting because they both talk about a situation where each of these respective people, the farmer and the merchant, both find a treasure of great price, something that they know is completely valuable, something that is worth way more than they could ever hope to achieve. And so they sell everything in order to have it. Since I'm kind of like practical in a way. I'm a little bit more practical. I like to think the next step or two into the story, because what would happen, say, that night? Like, both the farmer and the merchant, after having sold everything, they have no house, probably just the clothes on their back, no method of transportation, but the farmer has this field and the merchant has this pearl. What would happen? Like, granted, the farmer has it, in my mind, a little bit easier because the treasure, in my mind, it's kind of like a treasure chest that was like hidden in there and it's probably full of gold coins or something. So he feasibly could take some of that treasure and buy back some of the stuff that he had gone and sold. But the merchant, you can't really cut up a pearl to sell it off as in sections because that kind of defeats the purpose of it being whole. And so the merchant's kind of has a little bit of a dilemma. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, well, what are some different things that the merchant could do? In theory, he could go away into seclusion, he could find a cave and he could hide and he could treasure his pearl treasure and let that treasure kind of corrupt him. I'm sure that some of us might know people who value items more than relationships, and it's possible that the merchant could feasibly do that. But another option, and this is a very likely case for somebody who was in Jesus' audience that day, thinking a merchant, he's going to go and basically travel over to several cities down and he's going to sell that pearl for a profit. And he's going to make 10 times the amount of money that it cost him to purchase this pearl in the first place, and he then will have it made. However, with those speculations, I really can't speculate too far because it's not in the Bible, and it's just my brain kind of trailing off in a series of what ifs. However, what would happen if there was something, what would be a treasure that we could get, that we could grab onto, that would be worth selling everything? What would be something that we could not run into the same sort of issue that the farmer and the merchant ran into with a treasure? There's two answers that I thought of. One of them is a little bit of an obvious answer, and the second answer is one that kind of came into my head as I was preparing for this message. The second one being life. There's not really a whole lot we can do. We haven't earned life, but if we think about it, it's really a treasure. Health, being able to get up each morning is a gift. And perhaps the obvious answer for many of us here is Jesus. Jesus is our treasure in the field. Jesus can be our pearl of great price. And with Jesus as the answer, we're actually able to, we're actually in a much better situation than both the farmer and the merchant, because there's no limit to us selling, though rather I'd probably switch the words out and say sharing Jesus with others, because the more we share Jesus with others, we're not actually giving up anything, because it's more like a candle. You can light a candle and then you can use that candle to light another candle, but it doesn't put the first candle out. But now you have two candles lit. That's a similar illustration to what it's like when we share Jesus. And what if Jesus was to us like the field was to the farmer and what the pearl was to the merchant? And this was all of the things that was kind of swirling in my head before I read the passage that morning and before I had a revelation about this passage. I got to this passage that morning and I read through this and I was like, okay, I understand, but then it continued on. It continued on into verse 47. And verse 47 reads, and again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet, or you could call it a fishing net, that was cast into the sea and gathered some of every kind, which when it was full, they drew to the shore and they sat down and gathered the good into the vessels, but threw the bad away. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come forth, separate the wicked from the just, and will cast them into the furnace of fire. There will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. This parable stands on the heels of these other two parables because we look at the first parable, it says, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a farmer. And then we have, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant. And then we have, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a dragnet. Each of these parables is touching at a different angle on the same truth. But this third parable is different because this third parable is from a different perspective. And it hit me that morning. I was like, am I missing something? Because this the first two parables look as though they're from our perspective. This third parable looks like it's from God's perspective. At the end of the age, God's going to cast out a net and he's going to gather everybody and he's going to sort out the good from the wicked, like the righteous from the wicked. But since all of these things are hitting on the same truth, what would all of these parables look like from God's perspective? So let's go back through and let's look at all three of these parables from God's perspective. We read, starting in verse 45 again, we read, again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls. What? And then who, when he had found one pearl of, let's see. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field. 44, my mistake. When a man found and hid, and for joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. What treasure would cause God to give up everything? What would cause God to give up everything, including the life of his son? And it hit me that morning. Again, we can look at the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant seeking beautiful pearls, who, when he had found one pearl of great price, went and sold all that he had and bought it. What would cause God to give up everything, including the life of his son, Jesus? And the only answer can be us. You and I. And while I'm up here speaking the message, it's not like I'm any different than any of you. But it's for each of us individually. For all of the rebelliouses, for all the curious people, for all the practical people, for all the followers, Jesus came. The Father sent Jesus to give up his life, save us. Looking back at the story, looking at where we're at, the king's in the castle, and he's looking out the window and he sees rebellious, curious, practical, and follower playing, and he sees them go over by the river. And he kind of has an idea of where this is going to head. And he sees them fall in the river and get washed away. He calls his eldest son. He's like, Jesus, come over here. Can you go down there and save rebellious, curious, practical, and follower? Can you go down there? Are you strong enough for the river? Yes, I'm strong enough for the river. Will you go down there and save them? Yes, Father, I will. So Jesus goes down, steps into the river. The current is strong, but it's not strong enough to sweep Jesus away. And he slowly makes his way down the river looking for signs of life. Goes down, it takes him perhaps several days because he's going a lot slower, just scanning the shoreline, looking for signs, coming to the forks in the river and kind of figuring out, okay, which way would be the most likely that they would have been swept down to. And he ends up coming to Practical, still fighting with this current. He comes to Practical and he says, Practical, I've come to carry you home. Climb onto my shoulders. I can carry you back home. Oh no, the current washed you down here too? Just come help me make a path. We can make it together. Together we can make it home. No, Practical, the current is too strong. Climb onto my shoulders. I can carry you home. Continuing further down, Jesus comes to follower, still sitting by the fire pit. Follower, I've come to take you home. Oh, what are you doing down here? Did the current wash you down here too? No, I've come to take you home. Oh, that's good. That's good. But what about everybody else? Well, but I'm here. I want to carry you home. Continuing on, Jesus comes to Curious, still perched on that hillside. Curious, I've come to carry you home. Oh, great, you're here. You can validate all of this huge list that I have. You can come and we can go back to Father together, and I can share this list with Father, and I can point out all of this stuff that Rebellious has done, just the things that he has done, the parties he's thrown. It's just absolutely, it would be an absolute disgrace to the Father, and Father needs to know what Rebellious has done. Curious, I don't think I have room for both you and your list, but I'm here to carry you home. Next, Jesus walks down into the valley, knocks on the door to Rebellious's house. Rebellious opens it. Oh, Jesus, you're here. Great, you can come in. We're just about ready to start a party. Rebellious, I've come to bring you home. Oh, this is great life. We don't need to go back up there. Stay here a while. We're about ready to get started. You can just hang out here. We're going to have a great time. Rebellious, I've come to carry you home. Do you want to go back to Father? This morning, Jesus is here among us. He's calling all of the Practicals, all of the followers, all of the Curiouses, all of the Rebelliouses. And he's saying, I'm here, and I want to take you home. And as we get ready to close our service together, my prayer is that when Jesus comes and asks us the question, that we will accept his invitation and let him carry us home. Father, be with us as we go out from here this week. Help us to recognize you as the treasure in the field and as the pearl of great price. And help us also realize that we're your treasure and that we're your pearl. And help that truth to completely transform our lives. We love you, Father. Amen.